I always believed that Emma and I had the kind of life everyone dreams of. The perfect couple. Every morning began the same way. I woke up a little earlier than her, prepared breakfast, eggs and toast, her favorite. When she woke up, her eyes always radiated warmth, and she smiled as if every day was a new opportunity for happiness. We lived in a cozy apartment in the city center. Nothing luxurious, but it was ours. The walls were covered with photographs from our travels, moments that seemed timeless, as if we were the only people in the world who truly mattered. Our friends envied us. We were the couple everyone looked up to, always so harmonious, so content. Every evening, we had a ritual. We sat together, drank wine, and watched old movies. Emma always laughed at my sarcastic humor, and I couldn't stop admiring her zest for life. I loved listening to her talk about her day, even when she spoke about the most mundane things. Her voice always carried so much energy, so much love for life. But one day, something changed. At first, it was the little things. Emma started looking at her phone more often, even during our evening movies. She answered more briefly than usual and laughed less at my jokes. I tried not to pay attention, convincing myself it was just a stressful week or busyness at work. But the feeling that something was off had already settled in me. My trust in Emma was unshakable, but the small signals I began noticing made me doubt. And though I tried to believe that these were just my unfounded fears, something deep inside whispered that the perfect picture had started to crack. It all began with little things. Emma became slightly different. She used to always be there, ready to share every detail of her day, even the smallest moments. But lately she started to pull away. In the evenings, when we usually sat together and discussed the day, she became silent, as if her thoughts were far away. She looked through me, as if a different scenario was playing out in her head. The first time I noticed it was when she said she'd be working late. I didn't give it much thought because her job always demanded her time. But then it happened again, and again. She started staying late more often, coming home later than usual. When I asked, she always had an answer, and each answer sounded convincing. But something in her tone seemed insincere to me. One time, she came home well past midnight. Her face beamed with a smile, but her eyes avoided mine. "Stayed late with colleagues after work," she said lightly, quickly passing me on her way to the bedroom. Her voice was light, but too light for someone who'd had a long and exhausting day. Something started to gnaw at me. Her phone was now always lying face down, and when it rang, she rushed to answer, walking into another room. We used to have no secrets from each other. Now she started guarding her space, as if afraid I might find out something unnecessary. One evening, I noticed another detail. Her favorite perfume, which she used only for special occasions, suddenly became her daily choice. I asked, "Are you celebrating something today?" She smiled. "Just felt like looking good. Is that a crime?" Her words made me wonder. Who was she trying to impress? It used to be part of our life. She dressed up for me, and I for her. But now it felt different and foreign. I began paying attention to every little thing. Why did she suddenly buy new lingerie when we had just picked some out together last month? Why did she check her phone so often, thinking I wouldn't notice? Why did she have new friends I'd never seen? And why did these friends constantly make her stay late? I couldn't sleep. When she lay next to me, her body was close, but it felt like she was millions of miles away. In every gesture, every word, there was now something hidden, something I couldn't understand. Once, when she left the room, I caught myself thinking, what if I looked at her phone? But I restrained myself. That would be the first step down a path from which there is no return. Now there were two voices in my head, the one that trusted Emma and the one that couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. What if I was imagining it all? But what if I wasn't? These questions were eating me alive, and every look she gave or didn't give made me feel even more paranoid. Was I just a jealous husband? Or was I starting to see something Emma was carefully trying to hide? I remember that day down to the smallest details. It was an ordinary Saturday morning. The sun streamed through the curtains, and the room smelled of freshly brewed coffee. Emma was in a good mood, humming something as she packed her bag, getting ready to meet her friends. Everything looked perfect, perhaps even too perfect. "What are you planning today?" I asked, trying not to sound suspicious. She cast me a quick glance, not even lifting her head. "Just going out for lunch." "Relax, John." Her smile was warm, but I already knew there was something more behind it. When she left, I was alone in the apartment. I tried to occupy myself, but the unease inside me wouldn't let me be. And then I saw her phone. She had forgotten it on the living room table. It was strange since Emma always carried it with her, as if it were an extension of herself. My heart started to race. "Don't do it," I told myself. But my hands were already reaching for the phone. The screen lit up, and I saw a message that had just arrived. The sender was identified only by initials. T. "Thank you for yesterday. It was incredible. Can't wait for our next meeting." My heart stopped. I read the message several times, trying to find some other explanation. Maybe it was a friend? A work partner? But the words were too intimate. My hands started shaking as I decided to open the chat. There were a few other messages, all short but filled with subtext. "You look stunning. It was hard to let you go." Words she hadn't said to me in a long time. Words that belonged to someone else. My breathing became heavy. I threw the phone back on the table as if it had burned my fingers. A whirlwind of thoughts erupted in my head. What does this mean? Why? I tried to find some innocent explanation, but I couldn't. When Emma returned, I tried to appear calm. She walked in, smiling, and placed a shopping bag on the table. "How was your day?" she asked, leaning in to kiss me. I replied, "It was fine." "And yours?" She talked, and I only heard half her words. The whole time, I looked at her, trying to see signs I hadn't noticed before. There was no guilt in her voice, only the lightness I used to love. And that made it worse. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I convinced myself it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe it was an old friend. Maybe it was just a joke. But part of me knew that wasn't true. Every detail, her new behavior, her late nights, that message, fit into a picture I didn't want to see. I barely slept. Her phone lay silently on the nightstand, its screen softly glowing with notifications. And I lay next to a woman who might be hiding an entire world from me. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay in bed beside Emma, listening to her steady, peaceful breathing. She slept, and I wrestled with my thoughts as if I were drowning in deep water. The air in the room felt heavy, as if it were displaced by the invisible walls of my fears and doubts. I couldn't stop thinking about that message. Its words echoed in my mind, like a refrain. "Thank you for yesterday." It was incredible. Who was T? What exactly was incredible? Each sentence, each letter raised new questions, and none of them had answers. I wanted to ask her directly, but fear held me back. What if it was true? What if I heard what I feared most? Was I ready to handle that? I had always believed our relationship was strong, but now I felt the foundation of what I thought was unshakable begin to crack beneath my feet. A voice in my head, cold and rational, said, "You need to find out. An open wound won't heal until it's cleaned." But another voice, warm and protective, whispered, "What if you're wrong? What if it's just a coincidence, and your fear will destroy something that can still be saved?" My heart was torn between these two voices. I tried to calm myself, to think logically. Maybe these were all imagined fears. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I remembered how often her phone lay face down, how she now avoided my embraces when we passed each other, how her eyes shifted when I asked about her day. I felt like I was going crazy. Scenarios played out in my head. If I asked, she might deny everything. She might say I didn't trust her and turn it into a fight. But what if I was right? What if she really was hiding something? I wasn't just afraid of her answer. I was afraid of how it would change everything. Could I live with the truth if it turned out to be worse than my suspicions? I felt as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I could jump, ask the question, and risk breaking everything, or I could stay on the edge pretending everything was fine and continue living in this painful uncertainty. Both options seemed unbearable. That morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Emma was already up making coffee in the kitchen. She looked so calm, so familiar, as if nothing had changed. "Good morning," she said when I walked into the kitchen. Her smile was warm, but I saw something else in it. Or maybe it was just my imagination. I wanted to say, "Who is T? What's that message about?" But the words caught in my throat. I just nodded and grabbed a cup of coffee. Her ease only deepened my pain. That day, I spent hours thinking about how our lives would change if I found out the truth. Could I forgive her? Did I want to know? And if I stayed silent, would it mean I was accepting her betrayal? I realized one thing. I wasn't just afraid of what she might have done. I was afraid of who I would become after finding out. Could I remain the same person if the truth turned out to be as devastating as I feared? My silence had become my cage, but could the truth be the key? It happened on a day when I never suspected my suspicions would be confirmed. I was coming home from work earlier than usual. A meeting at the office had been canceled, and I thought it was a great opportunity to surprise Emma. I bought her favorite flowers, white lilies, and decided to stop by the restaurant we often dined at to pick up her favorite dishes. As I approached our neighborhood, I saw her. Emma was standing on the sidewalk a few blocks away from our home. She was talking to a man I had never seen before. He was tall, confident, with a perfectly styled haircut and impeccable clothing. They stood close to each other, and her smile was warm, the kind I remembered from our best days. But that smile wasn't for me. I parked the car around the corner so they wouldn't notice me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I watched as he leaned toward her and said something. Emma laughed. That laugh was for him. I felt a wave of anger rising in my chest, but I stayed still, as if I were glued to the seat. They talked for a few minutes. Her gaze, her gestures, everything about her seemed like she was a completely different person, not the Emma I knew. Then he leaned in closer and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. On the contrary, her smile grew even wider. That was the moment something inside me broke. I sat in the car, watching as she walked down the street with him. They stopped at a cafe and went inside. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I wanted to get out, walk up to them, and ask, "What the hell is going on here?" But I couldn't. I felt that if I did, everything would end right then and there. I stayed in the car, watching them sit in the cafe. They talked, laughed, and he leaned closer to her. At one point, I saw her touch his hand. That gesture seemed so intimate, so natural, that I couldn't believe my eyes. When they left, I decided not to intervene. No, this wasn't the time or place. I needed to know more. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why? When I got home, I threw the bouquet of flowers in the trash. At that moment, all I felt was emptiness. Emma came home later than usual and acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and told me about her day at work. I listened, but her words passed through me like air through a wall. My mind needed answers, not her fabricated stories. I decided to remain silent and watch. If she thought she had everything under control, I would make her reveal more. I would start gathering evidence. My trust in Emma had now become a tool for uncovering the truth. That night, I lay in bed next to a woman who no longer seemed to belong to me. Her face was peaceful in the moonlight, but I could no longer look at her without bitterness. Something in our life had broken, and I didn't know if I could fix it. But one thing was clear: I could no longer turn away from the truth. After that encounter with the stranger, I could no longer look at Emma the same way. Something in our relationship had changed, and it was noticeable even in the smallest details. I no longer felt the warmth that once connected us. Instead, there was a coldness, unseen but palpable. It was in our conversations, in the way she avoided my gaze, and even in how she quickly cut off any questions I asked about her day. I decided to remain silent. I understood that confronting her directly wouldn't solve anything right now. I needed evidence, real, undeniable evidence of what was happening. And so, I began to observe. Emma started leaving the house more often. She now came home later, with excuses about new work meetings or friendly hangouts. Her phone became her best friend. She no longer left it on the table or nightstand. It was always with her, in her hands or in her bag. One day, when she wanted to take a shower, I dared to take her phone. It was locked. She had never hidden her passwords before, but now that had changed. That small detail hit me like a punch to the stomach. What exactly was she so carefully hiding? The following week, I decided to follow her. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was crossing a line. In the morning, when she said she was going to a meeting with colleagues, I waited for her to leave and then followed her in the car. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely keep my hands on the wheel. I felt like a paranoid man, but I needed to know the truth. She did go to a cafe, but not with colleagues. The same man I had seen before was already waiting for her there. They sat together, laughing and talking as if the world around them didn't exist. I watched from a nearby shop, hiding behind a large window. At one point, he touched her hand, and I saw her gently place her hand on his. It felt like a punch to the gut. I took a few photos with my phone. I didn't know why. Maybe to have proof later? Maybe to convince myself I wasn't crazy? It all felt unreal. The person I loved more than life itself was sitting before me, but her smile was meant for someone else. When she came home that evening, I couldn't look her in the eye. She noticed my coldness and asked, "Is something wrong? You seem tense today." I wanted to scream that I knew, but instead, I simply said, "No, everything's fine. Just tired." Her smile was warm but insincere. She effortlessly transitioned into a conversation about her busy day, oblivious to the fact that I knew the truth. Her words no longer mattered to me. Every "I love you" felt hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Day by day, our communication grew more strained. She might have sensed that something had changed, but she never asked about it. And I stayed silent, afraid of losing her completely. It felt like a strange game where we were both hiding something, knowing the ending would be devastating. During this time, I began collecting everything: messages I managed to glimpse, her routes, even the photos I had taken during her meetings. I wasn't just gathering evidence for myself. I felt like one day I would confront her with it all and ask, why? But at the same time, I felt how this game was destroying me from within. I was no longer the person I used to be. I had become suspicious, anxious, and cold. Every time she laughed, I wondered, is that laugh for me or for him? My world was falling apart, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep pretending everything was fine or finally rip off the mask. But one thing I knew for certain: the end was closer than I could have imagined. The tension between us grew each day. I tried to act as if nothing had changed, but it was clear in my eyes, my gestures. Emma probably felt it too. Her questions became more frequent. "Are you okay? You seem different lately. What's going on?" I always gave the same response. "No, everything's fine. Just a lot of work." But inside, I was boiling. Every time she left the room, I found myself thinking about all the evidence I had gathered. Her phone calls, the photos, those meetings with a stranger. It all tormented me. I couldn't sleep. At night, lying next to her, I felt like a stranger in our own home. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. We were sitting at dinner, and the atmosphere was tense. Emma tried to tell me something about her work, but I was barely listening. Finally, after a long pause, I asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" She looked up surprised. "What? What are you talking about, John?" "You've changed, Emma," I continued, trying to stay calm, though my voice betrayed me. "You're coming home late more often, always on your phone, avoiding me. What's going on?" Her surprise turned to mild indignation. "I don't understand where this is coming from," she said, putting down her fork. "John, are you spying on me? You're starting to sound paranoid." That word, paranoid, made my blood boil. "I'm not paranoid, Emma. Just tell me the truth." She shook her head and sighed heavily, as if tired of the conversation. "The truth? I don't know what you want, John. I work. I have friends. What's the big deal? Don't you trust me?" I felt my hands clenching into fists under the table. She was making me feel guilty, as if I was the one doing something wrong. Her voice sounded confident, but I saw something different in her eyes. She was afraid. It was the fear of someone who knew I might know more than I was letting on. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to bring up how I saw her with that man, about the evidence I had collected. But instead I said, "I just want to understand why you've changed. I feel like something's not right between us." She looked startled. Her face softened, and she leaned forward, touching my hand. "John, you're imagining things. I love you. Nothing has changed. I've just been really busy lately." Her words sounded convincing, but I couldn't believe them anymore. That conversation left me even more confused. She denied everything, but I could see her tension. After that confrontation, our relationship became even colder. She no longer asked if I was okay. She seemed to avoid deep conversations altogether. We lived like we were on separate planets, each in our own little world. And I knew this was just the beginning. Emma now knew I had started to suspect, but I hadn't told her the most important thing. I had already seen enough to know something was wrong. And that silence grew heavier with each passing day. I couldn't live in uncertainty any longer. My patience had run out, and the pain of what I'd seen, coupled with the silence I kept within myself, became an unbearable burden. I realized it was time to put an end to it. No matter what the truth was, I needed to know. I had to free myself from this prison of doubt. That day, I planned everything in advance. I decided the conversation would happen at home, where we couldn't escape the topic, where every word would echo louder within the silence of four walls. I ordered her favorite dinner to create the illusion of normalcy and poured myself a glass of whiskey to calm my nerves. When Emma came home, I heard the click of the lock. Her face was a mix of anger, fear, and frustration. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stood in front of me, clearly caught between defending herself and giving in to the truth. The tension in the room was suffocating, every word cutting through the silence like a blade. "John," she finally said, her voice trembling but steady, "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you this." "Tell me what, Emma?" I demanded, my voice rising with desperation. "What is it that you've been hiding from me? What could possibly justify all of this?" She closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself, and then looked directly at me. "I've been unhappy," she said softly, "for a long time, and I didn't know how to say it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Unhappy? The person I'd built my life with, the woman I thought was my soulmate, was unhappy, and I never saw it coming. "What do you mean, unhappy?" I asked, my voice quieter now, laced with pain. I thought we were happy. I thought we had everything." Emma shook her head, tears still falling. "We did, John. We were happy. But things changed. Somewhere along the way, I started to feel disconnected, like I was losing myself, and I didn't know how to fix it. In him, I pressed, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Is he the answer? Is he the one who makes you feel connected again? It's not like that, she said quickly, her tone pleading. I swear, John, nothing physical happened. He's just someone I talk to, someone who listens, someone who sees me. Her words stung even more than if she had admitted to an affair. The idea that she felt unseen, unheard by me, was a deeper wound than I was prepared for. So I'm the one who doesn't see you, I said, my voice breaking. I've spent years loving you, building a life with you, and somehow that's not enough. John, please, she said, stepping closer, her hands reaching for mine. It's not about you not being enough. It's about me not knowing who I am anymore. I got lost, and I didn't know how to find my way back. I pulled my hands away, the pain too raw. You could have talked to me, Emma. You could have told me how you felt. Instead, you turned to someone else. She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she cried. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But I swear, John, it was never about replacing you. I needed to feel alive again. Her confession left me speechless. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Anger, sadness, betrayal. All of it swirled inside me, threatening to consume me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. Finally, I asked the question I dreaded most. Do you still love me, Emma? Or is this the end? She looked at me, her face a mix of anguish and regret. I do love you, John. I always have, but I don't know if love is enough anymore. Her honesty was both a relief and a dagger to the heart. I nodded slowly, tears welling in my own eyes. Then I guess we need to figure out where we go from here. And with that, the wall of silence between us finally broke. Whether it was the beginning of healing or the end of everything, I didn't know. But at least now, the truth was out in the open, and there was no going back. Her words hit me like a tidal wave. It's more complicated than you think. My mind raced, trying to process what she could possibly mean. I had already imagined the worst, so what could be worse than betrayal? What are you trying to say, Emma? I asked, my voice steady but cold. My patience was wearing thin, but I forced myself to stay composed. She hesitated, her lips trembling as if the words physically pained her. Finally, she said, John, he's not just someone I met recently. He's someone I knew before we even got together. Her confession sent a chill down my spine. Before we got together? I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. What are you saying? That you've been in contact with him all this time? Emma shook her head quickly, stepping closer. No, not like that. I hadn't spoken to him for years. But we were together once. He was someone important to me. And then, out of nowhere, he came back into my life. My fists clenched at my sides. And instead of telling me, you kept it a secret, you let him back into your life without even considering how it would affect us. I didn't plan for this to happen, she exclaimed, her voice cracking. I didn't reach out to him. He found me, John. He reached out, and I didn't know what to do. At first, I thought it was innocent, just two old friends catching up. But it got complicated. Complicated, I repeated bitterly. The word felt hollow, meaningless. So, while I was here, building a life with you, trusting you, you were rekindling something with someone from your past. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. No, John, I wasn't trying to rekindle anything. I felt lost, and he reminded me of who I used to be. Her words stung. Who you used to be? And what about who we are now? Does that mean nothing to you? It means everything to me, she cried. That's why this is tearing me apart. I never wanted to hurt you, but I didn't know how to stop it once it started. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger from consuming me. Did you love him, Emma? My voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. Do you still love him? She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her silence was deafening. Finally, she said, I don't know. Her answer was like a dagger to the heart. You don't know? I repeated, the words choking in my throat. You don't know if you still love him, but you stayed with me? Do you even realize what you've done to us? She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I was confused, John. I thought I could figure it out without ruining everything we have. I thought it would pass. But it didn't, I said, my voice hard. And now, here we are standing in the ruins of what we built together, because you couldn't be honest with me. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. I was too consumed by my own pain, my own anger. I had given her everything, and she had torn it apart. What do you want from me, Emma? I asked, my voice low. Do you want me to forgive you? Do you want me to wait while you figure out your feelings for him? Or do you want to leave? She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I want. Her words crushed whatever hope I had left. I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. Then maybe it's time for you to figure it out on your own, I said, walking toward the door. John, wait, she cried, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I needed to get out of that suffocating space, away from the woman I no longer recognized. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, the weight of her betrayal hit me all at once. I had no idea where to go or what to do next, but one thing was certain. The life I thought I knew was gone, and there was no going back. My heart clenched again. What could be worse? What could be more complicated than what I already knew? What do you mean? I demanded, my voice rising as anger and anxiety twisted together in every word. She looked at me, as if struggling to say more, but then fell silent again. Finally, she said something that struck me like a bolt of lightning. I didn't do this for no reason, and he knows more about us than you think. I froze. Her words raised even more questions. Who was this man? Why did he know about us? A chill ran down my spine. Emma, what are you saying? What are you talking about? I stepped closer, my voice nearly breaking into a shout. She avoided my eyes, her gaze dropping to the floor. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I can't tell you everything, not now. But this involves you too, John. Your past. The air grew heavier, as though all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. My heart skipped a beat, and her words lingered like thunder before a storm. What did she mean? What past? I was drowning in confusion. I stood there, staring at her, but she said nothing more. The silence was deafening. After a few seconds, I realized she wasn't going to say anything else. She was done talking, and I was left in the dark, gripped by fear of what lay behind her words. The scene ends with the viewers, just like John, caught in this unbearable tension, knowing that the real truth is still to come. And it promises to be more shocking than anything he's discovered so far.